Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Lifestyle Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Derek Williams, and I'm excited to be with you today. Appreciate you listening and taking the time. I want to jump right into things today and just talk a little bit about what I have experienced recently. I was talking with a close friend about how I viewed practice ownership and leadership. And as I was talking and sharing these things, this friend said, "That sounds a lot like a book I read by Bill Walsh, the coach of the San Francisco 49ers back in the day with Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, and Steve Young a little bit." I was really kind of intrigued by this. So I read the book and I wanted to talk about what I learned from the book and some of the things that it reinforced my view, but also just how it can be viewed from another perspective. One reason that I enjoy reading different books that are along the same topic is because I feel like anytime you can view one thing from a different perspective, it strengthens your understanding of that thing. I'm sure many of us have experienced viewing something in 3D from a different perspective. I I grew up in this area where I have recently moved back to, and I've paid much more attention to the mountains. I never really did that growing up. I knew that there was a lot of mountains around me, but I didn't pay attention to which mountain was what and which hike goes where and which mountains can you see from certain perspectives. And I've been doing that a lot more. And recently I was driving home from like an hour away and was kind of looking at the mountains off in the distance and thinking, I'm not really sure which mountain that is from this perspective. And so I decided I'm going to keep watching. And as I get closer, I'll recognize certain ones from the perspective that I have when I'm closer. I don't recognize them right now. And so as I got closer, finally I was able to say, oh, okay, this is that mountain. Yeah, now I recognize it. But it's just kind of an interesting idea that in 3 dimensions, you can do that. Obviously, in dentistry, we look at different views of, a prep or what a tooth is going to look like, or even when you're designing a smile, you have a lateral view, you have all the different photos that you are taking and they're from different views that show different things. And understanding in 3 dimensions can be very beneficial looking at different views. And I look at life the same way with principles. When I'm trying to learn something, I like hearing different viewpoints and different perspectives of one thing. So here I want to talk about the book, The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh. And this was a lot of fun. It was enjoyable to read. It was also fun for me because when I grew up, I was a 49ers fan. We were coming off of some good years and Steve Young and Jerry Rice. I remember trading sports cards and I loved getting Steve Young and Jerry Rice cards. So I want to kind of talk through some of the principles. So when Bill Walsh came to San Francisco, it was kind of a mess. There really was not a lot of structure in the organization. The fans weren't very strong. It was very much a struggling team and organization. I think probably a lot of us in ownership recognize that when something on the surface appears a certain way, a lot of times when you dig into it, there's a lot of other layers, and the foundation represents what you see on the outside, on the surface as well. We've always talked about how the production or the strength of your office is only as strong as the weakest player on the team. So Bill Walsh talked about this, and he talked about this process and what it was like going in from day one. And it honestly sounds like he kind of built everything from ground up. One thing that is interesting that I hadn't really thought of before, but obviously in a sports organization, you have the coach, the owner, the GM, the general manager, and those are typically 3 different positions. And when Bill Walsh came in, he asked to also be the general manager. He wanted to be the boss of essentially everyone in the organization. He wanted to create standards with his team, but he felt it was very important to have people in the front office, the advertising team, or the logistics of the stadium to have everyone aligned as far as their interests and their goals. And so he wanted to take on that role, and he was granted that. So he was essentially the boss of the entire organization. He started changing a lot of different things. He stepped up standards. There was even a story in there about someone that came to work with a tie, like a Vikings tie or something where somebody was from a different area. And he basically said, that's not going to fly. We are here. We are working to push this team forward. So if you're going to wear a tie, it's going to be a 49ers tie. And he made him change the tie. And obviously, I'm sure he probably ruffled some feathers, but over time, he started to really gain respect from all of the members of the organization. A lot of people talked very, very highly of him. One thing that I think that is important in this context or in this view that I feel like Bill Walsh understood probably ahead of his time. One statement that I love by Gino Wickman in his book Traction, he says, if any business were able to get every single employee rowing in the same direction at the same cadence, that company would be unstoppable. That really hit me, and it made me recognize that so many times the hindrance in our growth or in any company's growth has to do with that. How do you communicate and get people on board? It's obviously very easy with one person. In a one-person business, you don't have a very hard time getting alignment. Two people, a little bit more challenging. Five, okay, yeah, now we got to start having team meetings. We got to talk through things. But obviously, as you continue to increase that, and then you think of companies in the hundreds and the thousands of employees, wow, that is a very tough task to try and get everyone rowing in the same direction at the same cadence. And I think it probably doesn't happen very often because, like Gino said, if they were doing that, they would be unstoppable. So this is what Bill Walsh did. He got everyone, as much as possible, rowing in the same direction at the same cadence. So let me kind of give a few different really good examples of him and the way that he coached and improved standards. One quote that I love from the book that he talked about, he helped develop a team mentality. The quote is, "The game isn't won when Jerry Rice catches the touchdown pass. It was when the left tackle held his block for just long enough. When the guard picked up the stunt. When the receiver on the opposite side ran his route hard enough to pull the safety away. When the quarterback trusted the timing and before Rice made his break." So it's very interesting because for most of us fans that are watching in this type of situation, the glory moment is when we see the receiver catch the ball, come down in the end zone. But to Bill Walsh, that moment was more just the final brush stroke on a masterpiece that was made by all of the team members. And then even a lot of people that were not even seen, that were on the sidelines, or maybe even not present on the sidelines as well. So this is how he viewed his entire organization. It mattered. Every single person mattered. Everyone contributed to the culture and the outcome. And he instilled this belief so deeply that players bought in. Linemen, which is, often a underappreciated position, knew that they were heroes, even if the cameras didn't follow them. The backup quarterbacks prepared just like the starters because they were trusted to be ready. And the result? The result was a team where no one coasted, no one hid, no one thought that their role was insignificant. And I love that. I think that's how champions are built. Not by superstars alone, but by a collective standard of performance across every level. So another aspect that Bill Walsh talked about was preparation. He talked almost relentlessly about preparation. And this goes into, I think, one of the biggest things for why the title is "The Score Takes Care of Itself." He talked about how preparation, repetition, and readiness was essentially the heart, the core of a team's job. He viewed winning as a byproduct of just preparing better than anyone else. Almost like if you put in enough of the work, in some ways the results are inevitable. I think I've probably shared this before, but I remember being in dental school, reading a lot of mindset business books, spending a lot of time watching practice management CE, reading online forums of what other dentists were doing, what they had done, and building business plans, working through so many details and developing my own plan. I remember telling my wife at the time, this was probably third year of dental school, I had this epiphany. Here I was in a position which, most of you listening will understand. I'm like over $100,000 in debt. I have a negative net worth at that time. So it can be difficult to view things positively or optimistically or have a very strong vision of where you're going or what's going to happen in the future. And I remember telling my wife, I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm a millionaire. I can see it. It's like I could see my life and I could see that I was a millionaire, but I just hadn't reached that point in time yet. It was like my mental development was already there, but the rubber hadn't hit the road yet. The timing and everything hadn't lined up to present itself to me yet." And that was kind of a cool experience. And I think that's partially what Bill Walsh is talking about, that if you put in that preparation, you do all of those things, you surround yourself with people that are pushing you to the next level and that are high performers, it is just inevitable that you become that high performer, that you reach what you are working and pushing towards. So in some ways, he looked at football as Sunday, game day, was just the day of the week where the numbers were going to be recorded. It's almost like when you're trying to bulk up and gain weight or lose weight, that essentially stepping on that scale and the number that presents itself is just an accumulation of all of those efforts and stuff that's come in the last 24 hours or week or whatever. He kind of viewed game day that same way, where whatever that score shows at the end is going to be a reflection of the work that we have put into that previous week. One of my favorite quotes that goes along with this from the book, it's like one of the last couple chapters. He says, "Today's effort becomes tomorrow's result. The quality of those efforts become the quality of your work. One day is connected to the following day, and the following month to the succeeding years. Your own standard of performance becomes who and what you are. You and your organization achieve greatness." I really, really like that. I feel like all too often we view results as kind of a crapshoot, kind of, well, let's just go and show up and see what happens. But the results are an accumulation of the hour by hour, day by day effort throughout the week and the week by week effort at the end of the month. They're all connected. So, viewing, well, we had a bad day, or, this was a good day. We need to view them as being connected and that we continue to put in the effort each day and show up. And that is what's going to lead to seeing what we want to see on the scoreboard. The last point that I want to talk about is coaching. Coaching as a form of teaching. He viewed coaching in a really unique way, and I loved his style because we see a wide spectrum of leaders and what they do, how they communicate, and I think a lot of us see the flamboyant leaders and bosses that yell or get upset or throw fits at times. Maybe we see them as getting good results. And that may be true at times, but I think by far, if you were to look at all the leaders that display those characteristics, it would be very much a minority of them that experience pretty good results and go far with that. So let me talk about Bill's approach and how it was very different. He held standards with empathy, and he believed in giving clear and specific feedback. One line that he said that I loved is, he said, "You don't need to scream, you need to instruct." And there's a lot of coaches, I think, just want to yell, One story that I like that kind of exemplified that was just in practice, and there was a young wide receiver who kept missing a particular route in the practice. His timing was off. The way that he was cutting was too shallow, and the quarterback and the receiver just weren't syncing. Rather than erupting in frustration, Bill pulled the player aside and calmly, almost like a college professor explaining, one by one through a problem to kind of explain where the error was and how to understand it more. He broke down the play step by step. He told him, when you're cutting, you're coming in a half a second early. You're trying to think about getting open, but this route isn't about you. It's about the quarterback rhythm and the defender's spacing. Let's walk through it. And so they did. They walked through it and they kind of took it slow. It was quiet. It was deliberate. It was focused. And then once they had done that several times and it was good, then he had them replay it at a normal speed and then continue to do that. And by the end of the week, the route was automatic. So Walsh didn't scream. He didn't belittle the player. He taught. And when he took the time to go through that and to clarify and to really teach, he earned respect and he built trust. Think of that type of relationship with a coach. The player is going to be so much more comfortable coming to the coach and saying, hey, coach, I'm really kind of struggling in this area. Can you help me? What do you see that's off? Versus the coach that's just like, run it again. No, run it again. It is helpful as far as repetition, but it's not helpful in helping the player to get a better idea of how they can improve. I think this is such an important example for practice ownership because so much of the time, and I've worked through this obviously in my own practice, but also with other dentists as we're kind of talking through tough scenarios. A lot of times we see an employee, we see what they're doing wrong, we let it happen a few times, and then maybe we bring it up and we just say, hey, can you start doing this? Just make sure that you don't forget, you got to do it this way. And we move on. And then we just hope that they get it. But that's not what Bill did, right? If I was being Bill in this situation with the assistant or any employee, I would say, okay, let's talk through this. I want to help you see it from my perspective. So this is what you're doing. You're handing this to me here, but this is actually when I need it. And okay, come sit down. Let me just show you real quick. Okay, when that's here, see how this position is different? So you be very clear. And it's not belittling. It's not any kind of difficult confrontation where you're trying to make them feel bad about themselves. You're trying to be very clear and deliberate. Results are not going to come when you cannot produce clarity in what is currently happening in your office and where you want it to be. All too often, our staff hear what we're saying, but they don't get the vision. They don't get the picture of where we're at and where you, as the leader, want to be. They hear you talking about changes that you want to make, but they don't understand. So how do we do that? That comes through communication. It comes through clearly communicating. And on the other side of that is what I would add to Bill's process here is communication with the employee. It shouldn't just be coming from you. You should be asking the questions to try and understand your employees as well. So one thing that Bill probably could have done in this situation is before he even started, he could just say, talking to the receiver, just saying, hey, what do you feel like is off? Why do you think this is happening? Just tell me your thoughts. No right or wrong answer. And then just listen. And that's going to tell you where the player is at, where their mindset is at in their evaluation of things. What is going well? What is not going well? And we can do that with our employees. We can say, look, okay, tell me, what do you feel like is going well? I've been thinking about it. I have some ideas on what I would like to improve here, but I first want to hear, what do you feel like is going well? What do you see as being the opportunities and things that we can work on? Or, even it can be, tell me, what's your understanding of the goal in this situation? What's your understanding of our relationship? What do you feel like is your biggest purpose? Like, what is the biggest contribution that you can make to the practice day in and day out? Those kinds of questions can be very enlightening to getting inside of your employees' heads and seeing where they're at. Because only when you can understand that, the vision that you can paint is going to be more meaningful. You have to be able to meet them where they're at. And I think that's one thing that makes a really good teacher, a really good coach, a really good leader, is understanding where everyone's at and then being able to paint a better picture of where you're going based on that information. So I would challenge you guys, if you enjoy sports, definitely read this book. I think most of you aspiring to be leaders, owners, are already there trying to build your own lifestyle practice where at the end of the day, what's the score? If we're talking about the score takes care of itself, I would pose that in practice ownership, the score is what's our take home and how many days a week are we going to work for it? Or how many days a year? Like basically the question that I'm asking is how much juice am I getting for the squeeze? If you can approach things in that way, that's what the score should be. Looking at production and collections and the overhead. What's my take home at the end of the year? That's the score. And the score takes care of itself when we work on the day in and day out training. We work with our teams, we polish, we get to the point that someone else comes and looks and views things and they say, oh, wow, things go so smooth here. It feels like you guys can read each other's minds. I'm sure probably all of you have heard that from a patient at some point when a procedure or something goes really well. And that only comes after time, after feedback, after working on something together. Every once in a while, you might have a really good employee that can just catch on. But what's the odds of you always being able to have an employee like that at every single position in your office? Probably very low. I don't know that I've ever seen a practice with that completely laid out in that way. So what does it mean? It means that the burden is on us as leaders to see the gaps, to see where are the employees at, and then help build them to that point. We can't just sit back and hope that they take the reins themselves and push themselves to get to the next level and get our practice to where we want it to be. So thank you for listening. Like I said, I would encourage you guys to read the book or to kind of see ways that you can apply these principles in your practice. And as always, feel free to reach out to any of us, Derek, Matt, or Steve at thelifestylepractice.com. You can check out our website, look at the services that we offer as far as coaching or the Lifestyle Practice Academy. Take care, everyone, and we will talk to you next time.